Okay, let's open in a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for today. Lord, we pray that you'll bless our time together as we discuss some pretty significant topics. But as always, there is hope. There's hope that you are in control and that you will return and clean this mess up. And we look forward to that happening. We just pray that you will bless our time together today. In Jesus' name, amen. So today I'm going to call about it more war, and I'm going to go a little bit. I was just looking at my slide deck, and I have 275 slides. I did a conference years ago, and somebody was editing the video, and they got a little bit irritated with me. They said, well, how do you do 110 slides in 50 minutes? And I said, I skip 30 of them. That's how I do it. So I'll probably skip some today, and I will obviously probably do a midweek this week. I'll be doing both services next Sunday, an update second hour, and also preaching first hour. And I don't remember the passage off the top of my head, but I think it's in Mark 12 or 13. Anyway, I'll cover that when I've not started preparation for that too much. But it was a crazy week. It's Mother's Day, and as I told you, I'm going to go a little bit. Probably, I'm going to try to go till I'm done today. If you have to get up and leave, you can always catch it online. But I'll probably save some of it for a midweek. But there's a few things I think we really need to talk about. This was kind of a significant week for me. Many years ago, my father called me up one day. He was 58 years old at the time, and he said, John, today I've lived one day longer than my dad. His father had died at age 58 when I was 4. And I wonder, why are you telling me this? And the only thing I can wonder is he was going to torture me from beyond the grave when I turned his age. And so my dad died at 68, and so Friday was the day that I had lived one day longer than my father. So, but I don't have a son to tell that to make him think about it when he gets to be the age, whatever age I would be when I pass on. But boy, what a week. These are some of the channels we're on. We talk about convergence of events, and boy, was it ever a week for events converging. I mean, it seemed like there was a lot happening this week. This is probably a pretty good description of what's going on, the speed with which everything seems to be happening. Again, just as a reminder, this is a sort of a grid that I use: acceleration, convergence, logistics, and understanding. Things will be happening more quickly, quicker and quicker and quicker, and then they'll be happening all at the same time. And there's a logistics aspect, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. If I remember when I get there, and then also understanding, which we talk about a lot, is that in Daniel, it talks about the fact that at the end, there will be people who will be going back and forth through the book, and they will understand, and they'll be known as the wise, and the wise will understand and will instruct many. But it also says that the wicked, they won't understand. And that ties in some respects to I thought really a prophecy in Romans chapter 1, where it talks about the fact that people will lose the ability to reason. They'll be given over to a reprobate mind. I think you've seen this week that there are plenty of people in our world that cannot reason. So I'm going to cover a bunch of different topics. I'll talk a little bit about supply chain issues, which are leading to a lot of problems. We haven't really seen much of it yet, other than high prices and inflation, but things could happen in very short order there. I'll talk about the abortion issue. Now, I did do a midweek update on the leak from the Supreme Court, the draft opinion from back in February. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today as well, because there's some updates there. Then I'll talk about disinformation. It will be true information about disinformation. And the new DGB, we'll talk about that, the Disinformation Governance Board. And then we'll talk about war, maybe transhumanism, war in Ukraine, things going on in the Middle East. And then I want to stop. I'm going to end with something when I get to it about the Israeli Memorial Day celebration, because I think this is quite a significant thing that happened the other day in Jerusalem at the Western Wall at the Kotel. And so that's the thing. So the lack of reason. People are given over to myths. This is a bulletin board from a school. I want to show you some. You don't need to zoom in, Brian. I've got some different parts of this. I have teachers send me pictures of things they may be substitute teaching in a school, and they will send me pictures of what they are finding in the classrooms where they teach in terms of this whole LGBTQ transgender thing that's going on, which on MSNBC they deny that's just disinformation. That's not really going. But this is an actual picture from a classroom. But look at some of these things. On the left here, you see the asexual flag, the pansexual flag. This is a grade school classroom, by the way. The 6-color pride flag, the progress pride flag. Then here on the right, the intersex flag and the non-binary pride flag. And then down below, they have, the LGBTQ T+, 2+, lesbian flag, bisexual pride flag, and the transgender flag. And then in the middle, they also have another LGBTQ flag. And then in the middle, they have all these different things about original pride flag, Canadian transgender, bisexual. Of course, this is what kids talk about, right? This is a tweet that somebody sent me. Her name is Mia, so her Twitter handle. I think she gets, kudos for creativity. Cry me a river. But the most unhinged bit is this, implying that toddlers can be trans. These people are certifiably insane, completely bonkers, and a danger to children. I cannot believe this weapons-grade lunacy is being handed out in Canadian schools. And so down here at the bottom, you see here, this is a handout in lower grades, early grades in Canadian school. How old do you have to be able to know you're trans? And the answer is, well, anyone can realize they're trans at any age. Children as young as 18 months old can identify themselves with gendered objects and have a feeling of what their gender identity is. But I've had nieces and nephews and that type of thing. And, some of them that old think that they're, what was our one nephew? He always was Prince Valiant. He liked Prince Valiant. So he thought he was Prince Valiant when he was that age. And he wasn't. I mean, he was a great kid. I will say that. He acted like that, but he wasn't the Prince Valiant in the cartoons. But it says here, some people figure it out as an early age while others don't realize it until much later in life. Figuring it out at any age is completely okay. And then here, this is from an NPR radio, KUOW. I believe that's in Seattle. And this was a thing from back in 2016 when I was just looking up to say, well, how long has this been around? You need to understand, they've been after your kids for a very long time in a lot of places. I do think that it's at the point in most places that you have to say, you got to get your kids out of the schools. But here's a question, if you could zoom out on that. How early might a child express gender identity out loud? We have heard reports as early, and this comes from professional. We have heard reports as early as when their kids start talking, as soon as they can say the words like girl and boy. So a lot of parents say 18 months, 2 years. Parents didn't think much of it, so they thought, oh, my kid doesn't know what the words girl and boy mean, or I couldn't figure out why my kid wanted to wear high heels or dresses. So this is what they're teaching in school, and people say the moms of the United States are in revolt, conservative moms. They're challenging school boards. And so what happened? Well, how dare you come in? But the parents say, well, they're our kids. But people in power disagree with that. Here's one person in power who disagrees that they're your kids.
About our children. But it's true.
Here, let me.
And you've heard me say it many times about our children. But it's true. They're all our children. And the reason you're the teachers of the year is because you recognize that. They're not somebody else's children. They're like yours when they're in the classroom.
You stay away from my kids. Here's Oregon. Oregon, of course, I think the governor is named Kate Brown out there. She's a lunatic. And so Oregon has now published a toolkit, Menstrual Dignity for Students Toolkit. Well, we understand what menstrual periods are. Here's a couple of pages from the actual publication. And then here it is. And they have an act. This law, it's a Menstrual Dignity Act. But here's what it says. This law affirms the right to menstrual dignity for transgender, intersex, non-binary, and two-spirit students. Now, I talked a couple weeks ago about this notion of two-spirit children that comes from Native American and other early cultural pagan ideas. And that's okay to teach in school. But heaven forbid you would teach them about the Christian view of body, soul, and spirit. But the two-spirit, and so you're two-spirit, you don't know whether you're male or female, so all of this is just kind of muddying the water. And these are the people that are teaching your kids. And two-spirit students, by addressing the challenges that some students have managing menstruation while minimizing negative attention that could put them at risk of harm and navigating experiences of gender dysphoria during menstruation. Research also connects gender-affirming bathroom access to supporting student safety at school. Okay. Stay away from my kids, please. And so what they're doing under this is they're putting female hygiene products in male bathrooms. That's the whole, and they have videos of this to show you how to do it. And so I saw a video, I should have grabbed the clip, but they go in, here's the urinals, which are male, and there's the female hygiene products dispensing station. Do you understand what this confusion does to people? And what they're doing to your kids? So let's talk about supply chain issues. This is from the Jerusalem Post. This morning, global bird flu panic puts organic chickens into lockdown from Pennsylvania to France. Millions and millions of chickens in lockdown and being destroyed because of avian flu. And I have someone who used to be with the CDC, I don't have the video this morning, who said this is the next big pandemic that's coming because they fear it'll jump to humans. So that I don't know how long they'll keep doing it, but that Costco deal of a whole chicken for $4.99 is pretty good. I was in there the other day, some lady bought 5 of them. And these things look like turkeys did they're the size of turkeys when I was a kid. This is an issue, who owns the earth? And the Earth, this is a question from the London Times, and it's really about the Chinese who own a huge percentage of rare earth or other earth minerals that are necessary for manufacturing. 59% lithium, graphite 100%, cobalt 73%. Production, anode and cathode, look at that. Lithium-ion battery cell manufacturing, 79% China. This is also related to global warming. U.S. taste for beef helps fuel Amazon's ruin. This is from the Washington Post the other day. You people who eat hamburgers, you're responsible for the depletion of the rainforest in the Amazon. And I don't remember where I saw the article, but it was an article about cows wearing something to absorb the gas, the off-gassing that they have at times to help reduce methane in the air. And go for it. So if you see cows wearing what look like underpants someday, you sit there and you wonder, like, when John wrote Revelation, was this some of the stuff that he was seeing in his vision that we're doing? Because I think this is, it's easy to say, this is unprecedented in human history. Here's a report from Reuters yesterday. Nearly 25 million tons of grain are stuck in Ukraine, says the UN Food Agency. And grain is important. It's a sign of that things are okay, that you have bread. You might not have a car, but if you have bread, you can eat. It's tied into a lot of religious ceremonies and that type of thing, even Christian ceremonies and that type of thing, breaking bread together. But 25 million tons of grain are stuck in Ukraine right now. Nobody knows when they'll get out. To give you an idea, each of those storage bins, that's a graphic that I picked up, each storage bin holds 1,000 tons of grain. So to get 25 million tons, you would need 25,000 of those storage bins just to hold the grain. That's a lot. That's a lot of shiploads. And it's not happening. And so this thing continues in China. This is from the Global Times on Friday, Friday, that the Chinese Communist Party top leadership stresses sticking to zero COVID policy. So there's 400 million people locked down in China. That's causing problems with the supply chain. This is what the supply chain, these are greener tankers, greener container ships, and the red are tankers. This was a screen clip, I think, from Thursday afternoon or evening. There's a satellite thing. And it's amazing that the supply chain thing works at all. I mean, it's a miracle that things get from one place to another. But here is Shanghai, container ships. You see the green, and the circles are ships that are sitting there waiting to get into dock. Here's a little video that I kind of mashed together to kind of show the things that are going on. And the container market is just a little bit wiped out. Wired had an article, the supply chain crisis is going to get a lot worse. And it's just, the whole thing is just absolutely insane. I don't know. Sometimes you wonder if you have the words to put this all together. But all these containers have to get someplace. I mean, when you go to these big ports and you see these things, it's amazing. It's like, how does all this stuff get around? And now it's jammed up, particularly in China, where I think 25% of the world's containers are currently stuck in China. And, a lot of times these ships, there's these big containers. I mean, you can see that in heavy seas, these things might fall off. They do fall off at times. So it's very, very difficult for all of that. EU is struggling. I'll talk about this a little bit more, that EU's trying to get support for an oil ban on Russia, but they have a lot of problems with that. 2/3 of Hungary oil and gas come from Russia. So Hungary has said, we're not doing it, folks. We have people here that need to live. And immediately, everybody in the EU is all over Viktor Orban. Oh, you're a conservative, you're an extremist, you're a Putin lover. And he's like, no, I have to take care of my people. I don't have the elites in my country like you have in your country. This is an article from Zero Hedge to just yesterday. Poor rail service threatens U.S. economy, shippers tell federal regulators. Utilities are worried that the slowdown in coal deliveries could threaten U.S. electricity supply and destabilize the power grid. Chemical producers say erratic rail service has forced them to curtail production of essentials like chlorine used to treat public drinking water systems and the plastics used in medical products. And one of the nation's largest retailers of diesel fuel, renewable diesel, ethanol, and diesel exhaust fluid, says Union Pacific's plan to cut its shipments by 50% will create fuel shortages, bring trucking to a halt, and raise prices at the pump. Those were among the shipper concerns raised Wednesday during a second day of hearings on railroad service problems that had been created by a shortage of train crews. People that work, now listen, I spent the first years of my career, about half the time, working on railroad law and railroad issues. And back then, everything was, I would say, on a razor-thin margin, and they've taken tens of thousands of miles of rails out of line. I mean, we have the bike path right up here that used to be a rail line, and they've made good use of those around the country. But this is true, and they're very expensive to maintain. I've been out on site with rail gangs, watching them work. It's backbreaking work. And a lot of the guys, they're just retiring. So there's a labor shortage in the United States, so they can't maintain the rail lines, they can't put the trains on them, the trains can't go as fast, and the rail cars are jamming up. And so the companies like Union Pacific and other railroads are trying to move the cars around to get them in a position, and they do that by putting tariffs and that type of thing on a car. But it's just, the whole system is jammed up. So people are planting without as much fertilizer as they had. They're not going to get the yields. That's going to mean less food, less production, and that ripples through the whole system. I think things will seem relatively normal in the near term, but I don't know what the fall's going to be like. And the United States may be better off. And then you layer on top of that severe drought out west, Colorado, Kansas, New Mexico is on, they're saying that the fires in New Mexico are of historic size and intensity. Large chunks of New Mexico on fire. Major drought, extreme drought, severe drought in the San Joaquin Valley, which is about 40% of U.S. fruits and vegetables. I think I mentioned a couple weeks ago that almond farmers have, their warehouses are full of almonds. All their storage is full of almonds from last season. They can't get them to market. Why? Because there's a lack of containers to ship overseas. There's lack of rail cars and other truck transportation to ship things. I mean, you can say that I'm not making this stuff up. This will be pretty serious. And now the almond farmers are saying, well, you just don't flip a switch and say, okay, trees, don't produce almonds this year. And now here comes the next harvest of almonds, and where are they going to put them? This is unprecedented, really. And it just seems like, a couple of years ago, everything was okay. Bumper crops and all that. And it changed pretty quickly. And so part of it's weather, part of it's supply chain, part of it's the Charlie vector lockdowns, and part of it seems to be by design. So let me talk just a little bit about this. And you can I did about a 22-minute update the other day. So I hope I don't spend 22 minutes on this, but this is an important thing. So it was pretty clear last fall when the Mississippi case went before the Supreme Court that the Supreme Court, everybody who was watching it, including liberals and people who were firmly supportive of Roe versus Wade and a follow-up case called Casey versus Planned Parenthood, a Pennsylvania case, that Roe was going to be limited in some way. They were going to try to uphold the Mississippi law before them. Texas has some new laws. A bunch of states have enacted laws. A bunch of states have trigger laws so that if Roe versus Wade is ever overturned, a law will go into effect immediately in that state that will, in some cases, essentially ban abortion in that state. States are reacting very strongly to this. The opinion was leaked. It was a draft back in February. It was written by Justice Alito, who has long advocated that Roe was badly decided. And I had a liberal law professor when I started law school in 1977, which is a few years ago, that said, this Roe decision it's idiotic. They made it up. They had to find the right to privacy in the penumbras and shadows of the Constitution because it's not really there. They pieced together some cases like Loving versus Virginia, which was an interracial marriage case. Griswold versus Connecticut, I think, was on contraceptives, that people had a right to privacy. And then they said, well, you must have a right to abortion up till the time the fetus is viable. And of course, the technology has changed a lot in the 49 years since Roe came down. And the Supreme Court has really struggled with how to apply this, what does viability mean? And originally it was pretty much, first trimester, you can probably get away with it. Second trimester gets a little bit iffy. And third trimester, a state could probably ban abortions in the third trimester, but that's not the way that it's come about. There's been a hodgepodge of laws, including the Casey decision. So it was pretty apparent from the leak, and Chief Justice Roberts came out and said that this was an authentic document from the court. It was a draft opinion. And so what they'll do, the Supreme Court will get together in a conference, and it's a very secure conference. It will be only the justices in there. And I think I saw Ted Cruz talking about, if you need to get something to one of the justices that you work for, each justice has 4 law clerks. It's a very prestigious position. They hire only people from the best law schools and the highest ranked people in classes. You have to go through, there's like 2 doors to get into the conference room where the justices meet. And somebody leaked this to the press. The thinking is that it was a liberal law clerk or maybe a liberal justice. Laura Ingraham on Fox the other night, she was a Supreme Court law clerk for Justice Thomas when she got out of law school. And she said that at that time, Justice Rehnquist, I think Ted Cruz also said this, he sits everybody down when they come in, when they're starting, and says, if you leak anything from this court, we will ruin your career for life. You won't be a lawyer. You won't practice law. And so for however long the United States has been in existence, let's see, what was it, 1879? You've not seen anything like this happen. There was sort of a leak a while back about Obamacare when they were considering that it was going to be struck down, and information got out, and then Chief Justice Roberts changed his, by most estimates, he changed his vote opinion so that the Obamacare was upheld. And it was a ridiculously bad decision. It was horrible. He should be ashamed of himself. He wants to have this legacy of being the great mediator, and he just needs to maybe worry more about like doing the right thing. So whoever leaked this, they'll find them, and that person's legal career is over. Now they're being lionized as a hero. What a wonderful thing that this person did this. Why? Because it was done, it appears, to pressure the 5 or 6 justices that had decided to overturn Roe and uphold the Mississippi law to get them to change their minds. And you'll see some evidence of that. This is a picture from The Economist in their article, How to Save the Supreme Court for Itself. It looks like in the opinion, the justices on the top, Alito, Thomas, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Coney Barrett, have voted in favor of overturning Roe. Down below, this is a copy of the first draft of the opinion from February 10th, which would have been the first one issued. And then we're not sure about Roberts. He may support it, but he may not. You know, he's the Bush 43 appointments to the court have just been abysmal. Anyway, so Alito is the one who wrote this opinion. Only the draft of the majority opinion was released. It led to protest outside the Supreme Court. At one point, by the next day after it was leaked, they had 15,000 people there protesting, largely people in favor of Roe. It was front page news everywhere. High courts everybody was having a opinion. It's about 98 pages long, but only about 68 pages of that is actually the opinion. The rest is an appendices. And Chief Justice, you can see this is the first draft, and Justice Alito, it goes through the history. One of the things you have to determine when you're looking at this, when you're sort of creating rights out of nothing, is there like precedent for this in law? And he goes through and he examines in great detail the history of abortion in America, and that there was very little support for this. Abortion was actually punished. It was considered murder. They didn't really get caught up in the concept of quickening or viability quickening, as it used to be called. And so what Alito says essentially is that erroneous interpretation of the Constitution is always wrong. And Roe and its progeny was wrong. It was a very bad decision. He says Roe was also egregiously wrong and deeply damaging for reasons already explained. Roe's constitutional analysis was far outside the bounds of any reasonable interpretation of the various constitutional provisions to which it vaguely pointed. Roe was on a collision course with the Constitution from the day it was decided. And Casey, the Pennsylvania case, perpetuated its errors, and the errors do not concern some arcane corner of the law of little importance to the American people. Rather, wielding nothing but raw judicial power, as Justice White said in his dissent in Roe, the court usurped the power to address a question of profound moral and social importance that the Constitution unequivocally leaves for the people. And so you're getting a lot of disinformation about this, about what this case is going to do. For example, you see commentator after commentator, this is now women, getting an abortion is illegal. Nothing changed. Nothing has changed. It's sort of like Elon Musk hasn't bought Twitter yet. Okay, so nothing's changed at Twitter yet, except people maybe are scared about what might happen if he is able to acquire it. And I don't even know if that deal's going to go through. But in this case, and so Alito came out with this opinion, and it's very strong, which you might expect for a first draft. Alito's going to go 100% all in on his opinion. Now, the other justices can say, well, I agree to overturn Roe and Casey. I agree to uphold the Mississippi law before us, but I don't agree with Alito. He's going too far. And so these opinions have a back and forth and conference in consideration, deliberation between the justices. Well, I'll take this out, but maybe I need to put this in instead. So this is a months-long process, and this thing was leaked to get people to make a decision now. And I talked about this last week about, abortion legislation nationwide. There's a bunch of different laws that people have. They have trigger bans, total bans on abortion pills, protecting the right to abortion. California's come out and said, well, if this is overturned, they've already introduced legislation to pay for the expenses of travel, care, and whatever for women who want an abortion from anywhere in the United States where abortion is banned to come to California and have an abortion. Now, listen, at some point, they live on a big fault line there in California, and they are really tempting the Lord. They really are. Babylon Bee had a great headline. It said something to the fact that God Molech, that was the Old Testament god to whom children were sacrificed, has a supply chain problem with babies now because of this decision. Because this it's not a total ban on abortion. It will save some. People will travel. People will move to states where they can have this. It's become almost a sacrament, a religious sacrament on the left. This morning's New York Times, well, as I said, if Roe is overturned, 13 states, it's going to become, it's going to ban abortion right away. So here's the New York Times. The end of Roe is coming. People are talking about a civil war, disputes taken to the streets. And here is a bunch of opinions. Well, you see this, bring the fight to the streets. The draft opinions missing women, Justice Alito's warped feminism. Look at the lead editorial on their opinion page this morning in the New York Times. America is not really ready for the end of Roe. Now, do you see the graphic there? What it is? It's obviously Justice Alito's robe hanging on a wire with a bloody red coat hanger. This is the imagery of the New York Times. They call somebody like me, who would like to see a constitutional amendment banning this practice, I'm extremist. Their images are there to provoke people. Even the Financial Times has this thing, America's Abortion Wars. Michelle Goldberg yesterday in the New York Times had an opinion piece, the death of Roe is going to tear America apart. And on the one side, you see abortion rights for all. On the other side, you see all humans, no exceptions, rehumanize us, This is, the battle lines are drawn. Okay, when I titled this More Wars, I meant it. So here's what Michelle Goldberg says. If you think it's polarized now, you haven't seen anything yet, said Mary Ziegler, a visiting professor at Harvard Law School and author of the forthcoming book, Dollars for Life, the Anti-Abortion Movement and the Fall of the Republican Establishment. Conservatives, of course, in this editorial piece of Michelle Goldberg, who's an extremist lefty, conservatives, of course, have a plan for reconciling clashing abortion laws, a federal abortion ban. Speaking to NBC News this week, Senator Kevin Cramer of North Dakota said he was concerned about women traveling across state lines to get abortions. I don't find a lot of solace in that because it didn't happen in my state. So yeah, I think you could expect that pro-life activists would push for federal protections. And they're already introducing legislation. The Democrats have introduced a bill called the Women's Health Protection Act. This creates a right to abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy. They don't even think it's going to pass because they only have 50 Democratic senators, and they won't get the votes of Manchin and Sinema and some others. Some Republicans might cross, but they don't even think it's going to pass. Can't get past the filibuster, but they're going to put it out there because now this is a big issue for the next election. You've seen nothing yet, my friends. You've seen nothing yet. So it creates an absolute right to abortion. I'm sure what happened here. Here we go. Where is my... I'm looking for my... Oh, there it is. My cursor. The bill's chief sponsor has said the legislation doesn't distinguish between physical and mental health, and the text of the bill explicitly instructs the courts to liberally interpret the legislation. This new act would strike down almost all state laws on abortion, including parental consent and parental notification laws. You think they're done coming for your kids? There's another one here. It would gut conscience protections. In other words, if you're a doctor and you don't want to perform an abortion because of conscience, you're out. It's the same thing they've been doing through the whole Charlie Vector thing. Doctors aren't allowed to do what they think is best for their patient. If they do, listen, I'm telling you, I hear from doctors all the time, folks. You need to pray for these courageous doctors who are trying to protect people. And they're just going to add another thing to get rid of. They're going to try to purge all of these people. It creates a right for non-doctors to perform abortions. And I saw the conferences and everything. In fact, hang on a second here because I'm going to try to put in, let me see if I can find it. Okay, here's a conference, and you'll see Murkesi in the background. This is Kristen Gillibrand, and she's going to be, she's a senator from New York. I hate to play this, but I think you need to see it. She's talking about this act.
This is an issue that is defining for this country today. And if the American people don't stand up for equality for every American at this moment in time, we will be undermining a right to privacy in more than this context. Women deserve freedom and bodily autonomy. We deserve to be able to make decisions about when we are having children, under what circumstances we are having children, how many children we are having, and at what time we are having children. I would like to speak to America's men for 1 minute. Imagine you do not have authority over your own body for 10 months. Imagine if that decision-making would not be taken away, even if you would die in childbirth, even if you couldn't decide who you were having children with, even if you couldn't decide when you were having that child. I don't think a man in America could actually imagine not having control of his body, his bodily functions, what happens to him, and what life would be like.
Did we not just spend 2 years where people were telling you what to do with your body? Male and female? And since we're on YouTube, I can't talk about that. I'll put up a Rumble video. So here's this act. Look at what this law says. It's filled with these phrases, reproductive justice. Now, do you think this was drafted by a conservative? This is wokeness on an epic scale in this bill. If you want to understand the intersectionality of all woke, leftist, Marxist, stupid ideas, read the bill. You can go get it. HR 3755. Look what it says here. Reproductive justice to address restrictions on reproductive health, including abortion that perpetuates systems of oppression, lack of bodily autonomy, white supremacy, and anti-black racism. Margaret, 80% of Planned Parenthood abortion clinics are in minority neighborhoods. Who's the racist? This is egregious. You know, I have this vision of Alito writing out this, typing out, or I don't know how he does his opinions, if he's new school or old school, that, you know, the smoke coming out of the pen or the typing out of his computer as he's typing this thing. And it should be. The opponents are trying to burn it all down. Go read Douglas Murray's new book, The War Against the West. He was on Glenn Beck the other day, one of the greatest interviews I've ever heard. And I don't agree with Douglas Murray on everything. But he said we've got to the point where you can't question, you question the whole existence of the United States, the whole idea, the whole concept behind it. They're doing the same thing in the church. That's why Andy Stanley is so dangerous to the church, because he's always undermining the authority of Scripture. And he's doing it in a very nice, engaging way. And it's awful what he's doing. And every time I say this, I get emails. Well, I listen to him all the time. I think he's great. Then you really need to think hard. If you think he's great, you need to think hard about your relationship with the Lord. He's pushing the Enneagram and all this other stuff. People say, well, I don't know they did. He does it. He's on podcasts doing it. Good grief. Reproductive justice. Look at some of these provisions here. You know, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color and their families, realizing reproductive justice. Then it says this, gender oppression. And this is interesting. The people who say they really can't determine male and female are now writing a law about women's rights. Ask them, how do you live with cognitive dissonance on that scale? Gender oppression as they target healthcare services that are used primarily by women. Women, these, I would say this, they're only used by women. These paternalistic restrictions rely on and reinforce harmful stereotypes about gender roles, women's decision-making, and women's needs for protection instead of support. Undermining their ability to control their own lives and well-being, these restrictions harm the basic autonomy, dignity, and equality of women. Then they have a definitional section, okay? Oh, and that's, gender oppression. So then they have the definitional section. The terms woman and women are used in this bill to reflect the identity of the majority of people targeted and affected by the restrictions on abortion services, and to address squarely the targeted restrictions on abortion, which are rooted in misogyny. However, access to abortion services is critical to the health of every person capable of becoming pregnant. Birthing people. They've been using this language for months now. However, access to abortion services is critical to the health of every person capable of becoming pregnant. This act is intended to protect all people with the capacity for pregnancy. cisgender women, transgender men, non-binary individuals, those who identify with a different gender, and others who are unjustly harmed by restrictions on abortion services. They need to get, they even missed the two-spirit people. How smart are they? Here's a Twitter feed from somebody. Stop ignoring trans men in the conversation about abortion. Ruth sent us, that's a thing too. Now we must be ruthless. And there were supposed to be protests. They were saying they're going to go into Catholic and evangelical churches across America today to intimidate people. Everything Senator Gillibrand said, except we're not waiting 6 months and then voting in hope of Senate Dems freeing us of this lying SCOTUS. Investigate and remove the treasonous, corrupt, lying justices now. Here's the esteemed, put it in scare quotes, esteemed majority leader, Speaker of the House. You got to listen, it's only 40 seconds.
This is, I think, a right now crisis for a lot of women in this country. What do we do for them right now?
Yes, I think we have. I think you're absolutely right. We have to have a clarity in what this draft decision means, so that what the final decision doesn't go that far. The Chief Justice has said this is authentic, but it is not final. I don't want to use the word authentic. It's real, but not final. So again, Lincoln said public sentiment is everything. With it, you can accomplish almost anything. Without it, nothing. And women just have to weigh in. I don't think there's a good outcome here, but I think there's a better outcome than what we have seen in the first draft, which is radical.
She says, pressure the court to change the opinion. You are not allowed to do that. That is against the law. That is an act of insurrection, which she just said. And Nicole Wallace, she was in a Republican administration, but she went woke. Here's a protest out of Justice Amy Coney Barrett's home. Oh no, Brett Kavanaugh's home in Chevy Chase. They published their addresses. Why? Because they're going to go out to their houses and we're going to come and get you and your kids if you don't change your mind. Here's what one person said. This is quoted from an article in the Washington Post. We're about to get doomsday, so I'm not going to be civil to that man at all. This is a neighbor of Justice Kavanaugh's. Peter Ducey asked the outgoing, this may be our last clip of her as the chief, what do they call him, the liar in residence at the White House, Cruella von Zuckerberger. She's living to go to MSNBC. Peter Ducey said, they're publishing addresses. Can you condemn that?
Posted a map with the home. Not about yesterday, so just about moving forward. These activists posted a map with the home addresses of the Supreme Court justices. Is that the kind of thing this president wants to help your side make their point?
Look, I think the president's view is that there's a lot of passion, a lot of fear, a lot of sadness from many, many people across this country about what they saw in that leaked document. We obviously want people's privacy to be respected. We want people to protest peacefully if they want to protest. That is certainly what the president's view would be.
So he doesn't care if they're protesting outside the Supreme Court or outside someone's private residence.
I don't have an official U.S. government position on where people protest. We want it, of course, to be peaceful. And certainly the president would want people's privacy to be respected. But I think we shouldn't lose the point here. The reason people are protesting is because women across the country are worried about their fundamental rights that have been law for 50 years. Their rights to make choices about their own bodies and their own health care are at risk. That's why people are protesting. They're unhappy. They're scared.
There is no federal government position on this. How about 18 U.S.C. Section 1507? picketing, or parading, whoever with the intent of interfering with, obstructing, or impeding the administration of justice, or with the intent of influencing any judge, juror, witness, or court officer in the discharge of his duty, pickets or parades in or near a building housing a court of the United States or near a building or residence occupied or used by such judge, juror, witness, or court officer, or with such intent uses any sound truck or similar device, or resorts to any other demonstrations in or near any such building or residence, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 1 year or both. Go lock them up. No bail. How about that? You know how to do that. Here's Kylie McInerney, whatever, how you say her name, on the 5 the other night talking about this. There was an exchange with Geraldo Rivera, who's very pro-abortion. I don't know how Greg Gutfeld did not go across the table and smack him. It was that bad. It was awful. Get rid of that guy. Actually, get out of Cleveland. He lives in Cleveland. Do you know that? Okay. So here's Kylie. This is the press secretary we all loved. One of them.
So Jen Psaki got a second bite of the apple. She was asked this again today about the violence and the protests at the Supreme Court justices' homes. Here's what she said during a gaggle. She was asked specifically, does the president want protesters to influence Supreme Court justices so they uphold Roe? Which basically, that question verbatim is a crime if you look at U.S. code, to influence a justice by protesting at their home. Her response was this: I wouldn't say that the president has a particular view on this. Exact same thing she said about the leak. He doesn't have a particular view on the leak. So unprecedented leaks, no view. Protesting at a Supreme Court justice's home, no view. I get Jen Psaki's leaving. I get she's going to MSNBC. She needs her street creds there. I get that they say all kinds of outrageous things. Tiffany Cross said, let's quote her exactly, pick up a weapon and get involved. Nicole Wallace analogized those opposing COVID restrictions to drone strikes domestically on U.S. citizens. So Jen Psaki needs a hot take. She's got a hot take here by literally greenlighting a crime. And you can look up the statute, 18 U.S.C. 1507. There's also a code of Virginia against protesting at a primary residence. She greenlighted a crime from the podium. She greenlighted a crime in a gaggle today.
Harold, what's your take on it?
I am a green light.
What is your...
The president weighed in a little bit. It's only 10 seconds because there's only a 10-second clip of coherence that I could find. Here's what he had to say.
Because this MAGA crowd is really the most extreme political organization that's existed in American history, in recent American history.
So you see, I did a whole hour on this last week about this misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, extremism, and you're a terrorist if you disagree with us. This is scary time. I don't know how else to say it. You need to be bold in what you believe and say, because it doesn't stop on abortion, okay? It's going to come to churches that stand against abortion or stand against people destroying kids. It's the way it's going to be. So listen, stand up, take a stand. Here's a stand of some clergy out here. One guy on the right, you have the thing, and then this queer pastor loves you. Doctors, not doctrine. But we'll be okay because we now have the DGB. It sounds like KGB, doesn't it? The Disinformation Governance Board. And this is I talked a little bit about this last week. Nina Jankowicz, appointed as the Tsarina, if you can say that, I guess. She's having a baby soon. She said the Hunter Biden laptop was a Trump campaign project. She loves to put up, I shouldn't do this, but I have to watch a lot of this garbage. So you're going to have to, buck up and watch it too. So here's a little thing she did to the tune of supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
Ferocious, it's when a huckster takes some lies and makes them sound precocious by saying them in Congress or a mainstream outlet. So disinformation's origins are slightly less atrocious. It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie. When Rudy Giuliani shared that intel from Ukraine, or when TikTok influencers say COVID can cause pain, they're laundering disinfo, and we really should take note and not support their lies with our wallet, voice, or vote. Oh!
So the Disinformation Governance Board, somebody sent this to me and I put it on my Facebook page. So I think it was a friend named Jeff emailed me this. Notice that it's called the Disinformation Governance Board. It's not called the Disinformation Elimination Board. Interesting. So the New York Post last week, it's 1984 in Biden world. And here is her talking at the City Club in Cleveland back in 2021. Well, here it is. Nina Jankowicz.
Critical race theory has become one of those hot button issues that the Republicans and other, disinformers who are engaged in disinformation for profit, frankly, there are plenty of, media outlets that are making money off of this too, have seized on. And I live in Virginia, and in Loudoun County, that's one of the areas where people have really honed in on this topic. But it's no different than any of the other hot button issues that, allow disinformation to flourish. It's weaponizing people's emotion. And so what I try to tell people to do, and this doesn't solve the problem for us right now, but it is, a broader kind of skill set that I hope everybody takes home with them. When you're looking at stuff on the media, whether it's, mainstream media, fringe media, or even social media, if you feel yourself getting really emotional, there's a good chance you're being manipulated, right? It is meant to drive that emotional interest.
You mean like that? That's really getting us all upset because of what you're doing and your lies. After lie after lie, you're getting us upset? Yeah, that is evidence that we're being manipulated. And you're going to be the manipulator in chief. And then Mayorkas, that Department of Homeland Security secretary, went to Congress this week and testified because I didn't know she was posting all these TikTok videos. There's dozens of them. She seems rather talented. So she's using show tunes to make her point. I think it was the New York Post. I also saw a guy from the Federalist say they now refer to her as Scary Poppins. The disinformation propaganda nanny. I think it's pretty good. This is a bill, this is from the UK. Online safety bill will lead to restrictions on free speech and make it incompatible with the Human Rights Act, according to a leading media lawyer. And there was a report he issued, Index on Censorship, a legal analysis of the impact of the online safety bill on freedom of expression. And so, for example, here's a report out of this. Proactive state-enforced censorship by algorithm has questionable legality. This is a big law firm lawyer, a lawyer from a big law firm in the UK, who wrote about this and said this bill that they're putting in the UK is bad. The UK, where you can go to the British Library and see a copy of the Magna Carta, couple of the existing copies of it. When I went, it was right around the corner from an exhibit on Monty Python scripts. I mean, that's kind of an interesting juxtaposition. Proactive state-enforced censorship by algorithm has questionable legality. The legal opinion demonstrates how censorship by algorithm is likely to be challengeable in the courts, and as it is a legal requirement for restrictions on free speech to be sufficiently accessible to the individual who is affected by the restriction. Censorship by algorithm is by definition not a transparent process, meaning citizens will be deprived of the ability to understand how their speech online is being curtailed. Sounds sort of like modern day social media. Bill violates freedom of speech, he says, and he also says the Secretary of State for Digital Cultural Media and Sport will have an unparalleled ability to censor. That's in the UK. We just call it the Disinformation Governance Board here. It's the exact same thing, except nobody voted on it. And we have a constitution that says you can't do that as the government. There are lawsuits out there. State attorney generals are bringing lawsuits. The state attorney general from Missouri has sued the tech companies and the government. So go for it. Sue them. The structure of regulation offers no prospect of fact-specific adjudications on speech. It says here, these decisions as to whether they are, what's going on, and you can't say that, will be based on Ofcom's interpretation of the new law and existing rights, inverting previous norms on permissible speech. This is a report from the Aspen Institute from a year ago, Commission on Information Disorder. I covered this when it came out last November. That was headed up by Katie Couric. And they have a thing in there. We need to amend the law to make super spreader accountability. So if you want to know what our Scary Poppins, our new disinformation propaganda nanny, is going to be doing, go read this report. It will tell you. And this is somebody sent me this. This is a bank in New Zealand. And here, the bank is making decisions now based on climate change. Do you eat too much beef? Are you selling beef in your grocery store and you want to finance freezers to put that thing in? Have you considered the impact on climate change? And they've come up with, we want to be the leading Australia and New Zealand-based bank in supporting customers' transition to net zero emissions by 2050. So if you're banking with them, you're going there whether you like it or not. Aligning our lending decisions to the Paris Agreement goals. To achieve this, we will factor climate change risk into our lending for large business customers. Expect new customers or projects in the energy sector to disclose Paris-aligned business plans. And they have a whole thing on their ESG, environment, social, and governance thing. And look, lo and behold, here we go. This is now brought full bore into the business, private bank, big bank, and they're bringing in what? The UN Sustainable Development Goals. Do you see how it's all interconnected? I'll just talk about this for a second since I'm way out of time. I mean, I'm way over time. I'm going to be way over time. But, I'm looking forward to the eternity when time will be no more. So narcissism this is from the Times of London the other day. Interesting editorial. Narcissism is fueling a new age of mythology. The rise of superheroes, witches, and cults reveals our fetish for fantasies of power and meaning. And essentially what he's saying is, and by the way, Joe Schimmel at Blessed Hope Chapel, Good Fight Ministries, been doing really good on Marvel analysis on Marvel superheroes and the themes behind there, the messianic religious themes. And I remember Pam and I, the movie was on the other night, Captain America Winter Soldier, and Pam and I Went to see that when we were in California. It's probably the only movie we've seen in the theater in 20 years. And I only went there because I had watched it being filmed on the streets of Cleveland when I was doing court cases up there a lot. And there was this sort of transhumanism, mythology, messianic, this spirituality behind it. And Joe Schimmel's doing, and Chad Davidson and Tony Palacio are doing a great job at Good Fight pulling all this out. But this guy picks up on this. This isn't a secular newspaper, the Times of London, and he says, there's something going on. There's a big rise in witchcraft and spirituality. I don't have a clip of her. I will put it in an update or a presentation at some point of Grimes. Do you know who Grimes is? She's the witch. She says she's a witch. Transhumanist witch, who is the former baby mama of, well, she is a baby mama of Elon Musk. They had one child together naturally and one by surrogacy. And she was talking this week that we're at this really unique stage of evolution. I think she did an interview with a guy named Lex Fridman, Fridman. You can find it on the internet. Grimes interview with Lex. And it's pretty scary. Musk is still, now he's going to Larry Ellison and the Saudi prince to back the Twitter bid. I don't think it's going to go through. That's just my guess. He may buy it at a much lower price at some point. This is a great article at Singularity Weekly by Joe Allen, joebotxyz.substack.com, I think is his website. The Slippery Slope, the Cyborg Theocracy. I'll just read 2 paragraphs from this. Techno-optimists are like to say humans are already cyborgs awaiting their next upgrade. That's Yuval Harari, that's Grimes. She's talking about we've evolved, we're different. Transhumanism. This is the person Elon Musk had a baby with. Yesterday it was smartphones, today it's virtual reality goggles, and tomorrow, the brain chip. With each new device, our evolution toward human-machine symbiosis accelerates. That's obvious when you ask someone for directions and they pull out their phone. Techno-pessimists are largely agree. Tech companies are turning us into cybernetic organisms. The difference is that we're not stoked about it. Even if progress really is inevitable, there's no sense in getting all giddy about nuclear warheads or trans children or smartphone dependency. In light of their vices and virtues, some cultures are better than others. It's true that humans are tool users by nature, but you have to choose your tools wisely. All technologies fall in a spectrum, albeit with discrete punctuation from cave painting to the printing press to electrodes that write memes directly onto your wiggling brain cells. Every person has to draw their own lines. And every time new technology changes, I saw a quote from, I think it was Pope Innocent III, railing about this printing press. It's that people are actually going to start reading things. And we can't control the information. Well, that genie's out of the bottle now. I mean, but they're going to try. So we now have Scary Poppins. We don't have Pope Innocent III around anymore, but we have Scary Poppins, our internet disinformation propaganda nanny, to take care of us. So I would highly recommend you go and get this article because it's interesting. There's also something going on. This is at the Vatican. This is reports coming out, some saying that the popes, there's unusual that we have 2 popes living at the same time. Benedict resigned, and they're word that they're openly hostile to each other. While we've been talking about this, there's this trial going on in Europe. A stain of corruption haunts Pope Francis from the New European, the Vatican racket. And there's this huge trial that's taking place about financial corruption in the Vatican. Shock, 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 right? I remember I went to Boston one day back in 2001 or 2. Remember, some of you who were at the class I was teaching in another church at that time, remember the BBC guys came to film our class because Jody was talking about the work she'd done in Kansas fighting against the evolution bills, or for the anti-evolution bills, or intelligent design bills that were being put in place. And they interviewed some of us. You can still dig it out on the BBC archives if you search hard enough. I think if you just type my name in BBC, it might pop up. Terrible video quality. It's 20 years ago. But, you know, we had that discussion, and the BBC crew was there because the big fight was starting up in Ohio about the same standards. And I go to the airport that afternoon to fly to Boston, and there's the BBC crew in line in front of me. And I think they thought I was stalking them at that point. But in Boston the next day was the first day of the Cardinals' deposition in the Boston sex abuse cases. And this guy's coming up in this corruption trial about the Vatican. Now, I wanted to give you an update on the Abrahamic House of Faith, the church, the synagogue, and the mosque. This is from December. This is the construction progress in Dubai. It's supposed to open in about 2 months, in July, I think. And here's a thing from the construction site. I was able to dig some of the photographs out that they've published about that. So, okay. Now this is where I'm going to get into a lot of trouble. I don't think I've ever seen anything about as divisive as this among Christians as this war in Ukraine thing. So I have an opinion. I think all the leaders of the world are pretty corrupt. But I will say, there's only one country right now that's invaded another country. Can we all agree on that? There's one country being destroyed. We can agree on that. Now, we'll disagree about who's doing the destruction. But I'm just telling you, is the propaganda is unreal. And there's only one country that's having massive forced immigration to another country, and it's Ukraine to other countries. This is from 3 weeks ago. And there were over 5 million refugees at that time. And you can see where they're going, and they're having a huge impact. And there's a lot of Christians stepping up and doing ministry to these things. And there's a lot of Russians who've left Russia because they don't like the war that's going on. So I don't hold Putin in high esteem. I just don't. But I don't hold Zelensky in high esteem either. I don't like all the fanboy fawning over him. And Ukraine has corruption. And Russia comes out and says, well, Ukraine is one of the most corrupt countries in the world. Yeah, like it's right up there with Russia in terms of corruption. And frankly, you could probably put the United States up there now with the regime that we have in charge. So pick a side, but don't dismiss people on the other side, because people on the other side are pretty rational and they can think through these things. 5 million people have left Ukraine. Their population might have been down to about 34 million. And internally displaced, there's probably another 10 million at least that have had to move someplace else. So that's 15 million out of a pre-war population of 34 million. That sounds a lot like Syria, where Russia has been involved for quite a while. So the images are just, I think the Times of UK Times has done a pretty good job putting things together. Financial Times as well. Now the battle seems to be in Donbass in the east, and Donetsk, or however you call it. Russia seems to have retreated to those areas. It's not, I think any objective person would have to say it's not gone that well for Russia. So look, one of the views of end times Bible prophecy is the war of Gog and Magog. And there's a bunch of different views on when that war happens. Some say it's before the 70th week of Daniel. Some say it's in the beginning of the 70th week of Daniel. Some say it's at Armageddon. Now, I lean towards the end of time, before the Lord returns around Armageddon. But I could be wrong. But I'm paying attention. And then there's a dispute as to who is Gog of Magog and who is Magog. And I think you can make a case based on some ancient writings and maps and that type of thing that it could be Russia. But I do know that there's a logistics component to this because it says a great company and a mighty army come. Now, what does that mean in our today and age? Does that mean they have a lot of drones and missiles because of asymmetrical warfare is changing things? But I think we can agree right now that Russia has not established itself as this great, mighty, roll over everybody army. Russia has 144 million people. They're a poor country. Their GDP is about the size of Florida and Texas combined. Now, they have nuclear weapons. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And so they lost their flagship there. There's word that they turned to submarines, and they have great submarines. They have world-class submarines. They also lost, word is they lost another ship last night. We're in the fog of war. It's hard to determine exactly what happens. This is not the Moskva. This is a similar ship, about the same size, that's there. And so what happened was that there was a treaty. I think I have a video on this. I'll cover this in a video in just a moment, but some of the ships that Russia wants to use in the Black Sea, Turkey has kept out of the Black Sea. So they're using, there was a thing called, I think it's called the Montreux Convention in 1936 that followed the Lausanne Treaty that I think is expiring next year, that sort of set up the new modern day Turkey. And that's kind of an interesting thing because some people think the Gog-Magog thing is Turkey. But we know there are regions of Turkey involved in Ezekiel 38 and 39. We can all agree on that. So we'll just have to see how this plays out. That's what I'm trying to tell you. And no, I don't have a book on it. And if I wrote a book on it, I would probably cover all the different views. And then nobody would buy it because I haven't come to a specific conclusion. And, like I said, I think everybody who has a view can make a case. And so make your case. And then, don't hate on the people that disagree with you because it's a future event, so it's not a fact yet. That's my ultimate view. So this is the current thing. And you can remember Russia was going after Kiev or whatever they call it now. And they're not. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to do a land bridge across all the way over to Moldova to make Ukraine a landlocked country. And here's a little bit of a video of some things I put together. That was the largest, in that first frame, that's the largest airplane in the world that Russia destroyed. So that was Ukraine had built that. So they're smart people. They've done missiles and big planes, the biggest ones on the planet. And so what you see now is you see Russia is trying to build this land bridge across Ukraine to cut it off from the Black Sea. Well, what impact does that have? Well, that will have an impact. And you can see they've moved their trips away from Kyiv. They're moving them towards Odessa. And some think they want to shut them off completely from the Black Sea. Well, that landlocks Ukraine. They're bombing railroad bridges. They're bombing railroad terminals that people would use. So they're now in this attack phase. I think everybody that's objective would have to agree it hasn't gone as well for Russia as they thought. But the destruction across Ukraine is just unbelievable. I mean, it's consistent, though, with the destruction in Grozny and the destruction in Sunni areas of Syria. Looks the same. And people, I mean, it's just, people are going to they have to live there. And so this thing with the Black Sea becomes important because it's where Russia has warm water ports in Crimea Peninsula now. And Ukraine has a warm water port. But they got to go through that narrow thing down there to the Black Sea that Turkey controls. And Turkey shut down some of the Russian movement of warships. Now, has Russia nuked Turkey? Can we agree that they have not? Turkey shot down a Russian airplane in Syria. Russia got really upset about that. Did Russia nuke Syria or Turkey? We killed a bunch of their private mercenaries from the Wagner Group. We weren't nuked then. About 200 soldiers were killed by the U.S. So this is, I'm only doing this to show you that there's a lot of different sides to this thing. And we'll know more when or if the war is over. This is from the Financial Times. Anemic Russian progress signals descent into attritional conflict. And tomorrow is May 9th. That's the day that the Russians celebrate the defeat of Nazi Germany in 1945. And now they're saying we're beating the Nazis now in Ukraine. And people don't remember that Ukraine did fight with Germany against Russia. Why? Because Russia had starved millions of Ukrainians to death. They didn't like Stalin, so they joined with Germany against them. So there's this, everybody says everybody in Ukraine is a Nazi. Lavrov said, yeah, Hitler was Jewish. Now, I don't think that's been established historically. And he said that, and then Israel got upset. And so guess what the result of that was? Front page, Jerusalem Post, either Friday or this morning. Putin apologizes for what Lavrov said. Well, good for him, because it was highly irresponsible. So now we have this giant steel mill, Azovstal, in Mariupol, where a lot of people are hiding out. Now, I hear the civilians have all gotten out. It's a huge steelworks. This is an attack by a sort of a bunker buster bomb that was used by Russia on that. I don't know. I don't know if they've said that the Ukrainians were doing that to themselves or not. Every time something happens, Russia says it's the Ukrainians did it to themselves to make us look bad. And all I know is one country invaded another, and there's a lot of destruction. So it's a big steelworks in Russia. A lot of concerns. They had this thing with the theater where 1,200 people were hiding out in Mariupol, and it got hit. And the U.S. has been involved. And here, this is from Times of London. Putin apologizes to Israeli Prime Minister for Jewish Hitler jibe that his foreign minister Lavrov did. Pro-Ukrainian hackers launch unprecedented attack on Russia. And now there's the specter of nuclear war because Putin and his people are threatening nuclear war. I played you the clip of him from the Valdov dialogues from about 4.5 years ago, where he said, listen, if we feel threatened, we will do a first nuclear strike. That's their doctrine. And he said, and by the way, we're Christian and you'll all go to hell and we'll go to paradise. That's what, I played you the clip of that. That's what Putin said. Now, I don't know that anybody else is threatening with nuclear weapons, but this is a video they released the other day. This was on Russian TV showing a nuclear strike on Berlin, Paris, and London. And here's the video that they put up. And you'll see that this one is that they use this Poseidon nuclear torpedo. And he's saying, listen, Britain, we got the Poseidon underwater drone. I played clips of this from a couple of years ago when they released it. It'll come in at 200 kilometers per hour. It'll explode. It'll send a giant, you'll see the video, a giant tidal wave across Ireland. 100 megaton warhead. This is Russian TV. 500 meters high. Now, I don't know if it'll do that, but... And then it will turn it into a nuclear radioactive desert for a long time. The British Isles. Unfit for anything for years to come. That's the world we live in. And then this other commentator said the British Isles are no more. And here's a group here, Margaret Semenyan, Margarita, and she says, look, we either lose in Ukraine or World War III starts. I think World War III is more realistic. Knowing us, knowing our leader, Vladimir Putin, the most incredible outcome that all this will end with a nuclear strike seems more probable to me than any other course of events. To my horror, on one hand, on the other hand, with the understanding that it is what it is. But we will go to heaven and they will simply croak. So I'm not making that up. So I can guarantee you in my email comments this week, everyone's, you need to watch so-and-so. They will set you straight on what's going on over there. Listen, I'm a thinking person. I understand this. Nobody else is threatening this. And here's the thing from Haaretz says, what Putin's war tells us about freedom and slavery. And they released all these pictures and videos of their Satan missile test that they did. Has anybody else done a missile test, a nuclear capable missile test? We canceled ours. Russia thinks this is or EU thinks this is a big deal. They're upset with Hungary because they won't get in on banning oil. And then, interesting enough, this is what Putin wanted to do, was to bust up Europe and get them fighting with each other. But now it appears that he's brought them together. It's kind of the opposite reaction as to what he was trying to do. And this is a Twitter page of a guy named Guy Verhofstadt. One Europe, one future. And this tweet is what he said yesterday, breaking. Conference on the Future of Europe approves radical overhaul of the EU, end of unanimity, abolishment of vetoes, launch of joint armed forces of the Union, transnationalism, and many other reforms. And so one of the end-time views is that the EU will coalesce into this final beast empire and eventually invade Israel. Okay, people make the case for that. It's not the view that I think is realistic from a logistics thing. But look, this is a big deal. They're talking things that they haven't really talked about. Look at what this guy said in the meeting April 29th of the Council for the Future of Europe. This is what he said.
Happen, and the European Parliament will do everything what is necessary. What we're going to do is very simple. Parliament will next week, based on the conclusions of the conference, launch a revision of the treaties to make it happen the fastest as possible. We will use Article 48 in the treaties to launch such a process. Because you deserve it, and because the European Union absolutely desperately needs that it happens. There is no time to lose. The world of tomorrow is a world of empires, ladies and gentlemen, dear citizens.
And so they voted to do this. And they want to end, like, right now, Hungary can veto some things that they're doing, and they don't like that. Western banks brace for $10 billion write-off and retreat from Russia. And Russia's making out like a bandit. Price of oil is way up. They need a barrel of oil for $44. What is it now, $110, $120 a barrel? But listen, one of the reasons that Russia started this was Vladimir Putin's view of history. And I disagree with his view of history, but he has a very expansive thing about Eurasia and Russia and how important it is and how he's protecting the mother church, the Russian Orthodox Church and Christianity. But at the beginning of the war, he had a border. So the blue area are NATO countries. And you see the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania came in about 2004. And so they did border right on Russia. And they're kind of cut off from Poland because of this Kaliningrad place. That's where they launched the nuclear missiles from in that video, or that clip, that picture that I showed you a few minutes ago. And so when he started the war, he said, I don't want NATO on my border. So what did he do? Well, let's say he takes over Ukraine. He's effectively taken over Belarus. Well, he's got a bigger border right on the border of NATO now than he did before the war started. That just doesn't seem rational to me. And I don't think the war's gone like he wanted. And people in Moldova are kind of concerned that he might do that. So he's increased the part of his country that has a direct border with NATO, assuming he's in control of Ukraine. So I don't know. Look, there's a lot of arguments you can make on all sides of this. All I know is people are dying and people are suffering, and I don't like to see that. And it might impact Israel. Here's an article from the Jerusalem Post a couple weeks ago, because it might have an impact. Russia's in Syria. It appears that Russia is drawing back from Syria because they need the troops and support in Ukraine. So what, nature and war abhor vacuums. So if Russia pulls back from Syria, who's going to run in to fill the vacuum? Who's the next most powerful country there? It's Iran. That's Persia. And everybody who talks about Ezekiel 38, we all agree on Persia and Iran being part of that. And so now you have Iran coming in. So maybe Israel doesn't need to go to Russia to get permission to do airstrikes in Syria now. They can do even more because Russia's not there. Russia's had to withdraw from Syria. And that might be an argument against Russia being involved in Ezekiel 38 and 39. But things can change. We started the year thinking maybe there'll be a war, maybe there won't be. Well, it turns out there's a war. Well, it's some kind of operation, a cleansing operation, whatever Putin calls it. So Putin's again apologized for Lavrov's Hitler comments. I know it's Mother's Day. So I want to show you, well, let's just do a quick tour of the Middle East. I'll talk about this in more detail because all of this is a big deal in Bible prophecy. A week or so ago, Erdogan went to Saudi Arabia, and there you see him with the king, with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And we're going to cooperate with Saudi Arabia. Now, part of this may be done because Turkey's got some economic problems and he's looking for money. But this is how these end-time coalitions that fit into Bible prophecy come together. And here he is with Mohammed bin Salman and the king. There's another picture of him. And then, like the good Muslim that he is, and he won awards for reciting the Quran when he was a young man. And 2 days older than he is. Here he is at the Grand Mosque in Mecca, making his pilgrimage. This is what he did when he was in Saudi Arabia. He went to the Grand Mosque, the Kaaba. It's the first time he's been there in about 5 years. And I always find particularly when it's Erdogan and the leader of Turkey, I think it's kind of creepy. And here he is, because he's an elite, he gets to go inside the Holy Kaaba, supposedly built, they say, by Abraham. Now, he's been on a mission. He turned this church into a mosque. This is a picture of the interior of this great church that for 1,000 years was the largest church in Christendom. Now it's an Orthodox church, and we can argue about theology and everything, but everybody thought it was a Christian church. But now you see, things there with the Quran writings on them. And it was turned into a mosque. Then it was a museum starting in about 1922 when Ataturk took over. And then last summer, Erdogan went there and turned it back into a mosque. The largest church in Christendom. It's a phenomenal building. He's put a seminary there, dedicated it. Here's him doing his thing a year ago, reciting the Quran there. And it's not like they needed another mosque. They've got the blue mosque down here in the foreground. It's not like they don't sit on the same piece of land almost. The Pope went there. Reading from and taking the Quran. Now, this was a few years ago. So it's a big deal. And so you have this thing, there's all this concern about the Black Sea and what's going to happen in the gas and oil and that sort of thing. It says here, the Middle East can cover Europe's energy needs, but at what price? And, some of the people are saying, well, we have gas in the Eastern Mediterranean, we can get it to Europe, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's just not, and I don't think it's enough to cover the shortfall from cutting off Russia. They're going to have to bring in liquefied natural gas. That requires specialized terminals, ships, and that sort of thing. And so anything coming from the Israel fields or other fields in the Eastern Mediterranean is, in my view, years away. So it's not something that's going to happen. But this is the Atlantic Council, I believe, saying why the Black Sea could emerge as the world's next great energy battleground. And so it talks about the fact that around the Black Sea, they're finding gas in the Black Sea. And you have this Turk Stream pipeline that comes across it. It's to replace the other pipeline that went through, what do they call those states where the Serbs and Bosnia and the Baltic states? Well, whatever they've always been fighting. And you talk about, why are you doing that? And it goes back hundreds of years. So there's this pipeline thing they're talking about. There's Turkey has this exclusive economic zone where they're supposedly getting gas from. It's pretty deep, but they're talking about developing it. And then because the Bosporus is kind of narrow, Erdogan has plans, and they've already broken ground on it, to build this giant canal west of the Bosporus, because it'll get around some of the treaties. Here's some good graphics on, this is the Bosporus. So you can see there are bridges there, and it's hard to get things through there, and there are limitations on sizes, and warships can only be a certain size. So what Russia, and nobody else can go into the Black Sea if within the area of the Aegean Sea there's ships totaling a certain amount of tonnage. So what did Russia do? They're smart. They put a ship there that pretty much satisfies the tonnage size to prevent anybody else from going in there. But now Turkey's kind of limiting their transit through the Bosporus, and then the Dardanelles further to the south, also narrow. There's the Dardanelles there where the oil's going through right now. That's a warship, not allowed to do that. Russia's been blocking that. And so Erdogan says, we're going to build another canal. We're going to essentially turn Istanbul into an island. Fascinating thing about geography here. And I do think that ultimately this plays into some of the end times disputes that are talked about. I think there's a little part of this graphic that shows warships. Yeah, it's 15,000 tons total. You know, how they're allowed to go through the canal or through the Bosporus. But there's limitation on them and time. That's from the Montreux Treaty about 1937. And Russia puts a ship there that says, well, you know, we've already hit the limit and our ship's going to stay there for a while. So nobody else can go through there. And there's that picture of that ship that I showed you that's similar to their ship that got sunk a while back. So Turkey says, well, you know, we'll get money if we allow other ships to go through the canal. We really can't do that. We can't get money from the Bosporus. We're not allowed to do that by treaty. So we'll build a whole different canal. And there's a lot of talk, is it economically viable and that type of thing. Very interesting study. So, look, we need to talk about the Middle East. I'm going to finish with this. This was a strange convergence of Ramadan, Passover, and Christian celebration of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, all sort of hitting at the same time. And it's turned into a flashpoint. The Palestinians, Hamas in particular, have played it up, but then the Iranian press is just full of this, and here's a thing from Army Day a couple weeks ago, April 19th, where they put all their drones on display, some of their most recent drones. I'll cover this more. Everybody was making a speech. Ayatollah Khamenei, the chief of the IRGC, says Israel's on the path to decline. They were putting out pictures of new missiles, and then they have other video that it's nice that they release everything. This is missiles that they had. There was also videos that they released of drones, Iranian drones. And they've achieved some pretty good technological capabilities. Some of these drones they have can loiter in the air near targets for up to 30 hours. And then they're called kamikaze drones, and then they just go in and they blow the thing up. And so the Iranian press was big over the last couple of weeks of different Quds Day, a new equation in Palestine, and the protests all over. This is in Tehran. The other guy, Salami from the IRGC, or Khani, Ismail Khani, said that they had flown drones across Israel, and Israel had responded, but the drones were able to come back. Khamenei gave a speech at which he said that the world is on the threshold of a new world order. And it's going to be a multipolar world, I think. Quds Day is a good opportunity to empathize and show solidarity with the oppressed people of Palestine and to inspire and empower them. So that they can keep presence in the fields. And he goes on to say, one of the things he said, that, you know, what has happened in Palestine in recent years is a seal of annulment of all schemes for compromise with the Zionist enemy. This is due to the fact that no plan for Palestine is implementable in the absence of Palestine or against the consent of its owners, the Palestinians. The truth is that as long as the usurping criminal Zionist regime is dominating Al-Quds, all of the days of the year should be considered Quds Day. The Holy Al-Quds, that's what they call the Temple Mount, Jerusalem. Holy Al-Quds is the heart of Palestine, and the entirety of Palestine from the river to the sea is Al-Quds spread out. The Palestinian nation is showing every day that it has stood up to the oppressors. At the same time, there's progress on the parliament came out and said, you're being sacrilegious in the way you're dealing with Al-Aqsa Mosque, and they don't just refer to the building, they refer to the whole Temple Mount. At the same time, the Iranian nuclear negotiations, I thought this was a good editorial cartoon from, I think, a Saudi newspaper about that. Former Iranian MP, member of parliament, came out and said, you know, all that stuff we said we don't want a nuclear bomb? We've wanted a nuclear bomb all along. We've been going for this. And everybody knows this, but they continue to say this. Now, this guy named Sinwar, who's the head of Hamas in Gaza, gave a speech. I'm going to play a couple clips of it. Then I have, I think, a little bit on some things that happened in Jerusalem the other day. But I think you need to set this up. So there's been a lot of terror attacks. So on April 30th, he got up there, and on his podium is written, "The sword of Jerusalem will not return to its case." In other words, we're at war. And we're going to do this. Throughout the entire speech, the image of Israeli soldiers in Al-Aqsa Mosque with their shoes on was played, even though we have pictures of Islamic people playing soccer in the middle of Al-Aqsa Mosque and running around with their shoes on, picking up rocks to throw at soldiers. So anyway, Sinwar gave this, it's about an hour-long speech, April 30th, 2002, just a little over a week ago, last Saturday, I guess it was. It was his first speech in almost a year, and he had a number of things to say. This is a picture of Zionist occupation soldiers entering the Al-Quds Qibla, their holy place. The picture must never repeat itself. Whoever makes the decision to repeat this desecration of the Al-Aqsa Mosque will be making a decision to desecrate thousands of synagogues and Jewish temples all over the world. We'll respond to it, he's saying. This picture means one thing, that the enemy wants to turn this war into a religious war. You see how they interpret things? It's almost like dealing with the Democrats. We prefer that the war does not turn into a religious war. I don't notice the difference. But if the leaders of the occupation and their extremists want to turn it into a religious war, we accept the challenge. Harming the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem means a regional religious war. When it comes to our religion and our holy places, we will spare nothing and will not hesitate to make the decision. If this entity continues its policies, take it from me. It will change the shape of planet Earth because a regional religious war will leave the Earth scorched. A few days ago, it was revealed that we have prepared a first salvo of 1,111 rockets for when we have to defend Al-Aqsa, because of this number is made of 211 figures. It commemorates the martyrdom of the eternal leader, and I forget the other person. This salvo will also be named the martyr. It'll be named after Yasser Arafat. Then he goes on to say some things that are really pretty amazing. Our people under occupation inside Israel and the Negev, the Triangle region, the Galilee, Haifa, Jaffa, Accra. Whoever has a gun should prepare it, and whoever does not have a gun should prepare a cleaver or an axe. If they want this to be a religious war, they will be shattering all the red lines, and we should be on standby. From satellites, the entire region should be seen engulfed in raging fire. If they want a religious holy war, and if they do not stop their provocations of our feelings toward Al-Aqsa Mosque, I would like to address the people of the United Arab List and their leader, Knesset member Mansour Abbas, part of the ruling coalition in Israel, providing a security net to this Israeli government, which decided to desecrate the Al-Aqsa Mosque. You committed a crime we cannot forgive. This is a guy that will tell you that Israel's a religion of peace. On behalf of myself, you, or our people in the Gaza Strip and the Palestinian people, I salute the Hebrews who carried out the operation this morning in Ariel near Safed. It was a terrorist attack. Our dear people, if you exert your efforts, all the settlements of the West Bank can be evacuated by the end of this year, just like the settlements of Gaza back in 2005. I say to our people in the West Bank, do not wait for a decision from anyone. The lone wolf operations have proven to be extremely successful. 2 or 3 people at the most without letting anyone know. And do not write anything about it on social media platforms because the enemy is good at monitoring the social media platforms. And so now they've come out with things saying, well, we found this in Israel. See, they're going after our peaceful leader. They're targeting him. From Jerusalem Post, terror groups now vow massive missile strikes, bombings of targeted killings resume. And then this is Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas. He must spend like 30, 40, 50 bucks a day getting that beard trimmed. Come on. He always looks like that. Poor, poor person. Lives in Qatar, funded by the rich Qatari government. And he said that our people did not and will not stand silent whenever the targeting of our sanctuaries happens. Now people, even in the Palestinian community, are criticizing Sinwar. It's like you put a target on all of us by your speech. Factions say Operation El-Ad confirms that violating Al-Aqsa will unite the region. So this is from the UAE National. Israeli police in confrontation with Palestinian protesters at Al-Aqsa. And how dare they, the Jews, they went up on the Temple Mount. And this is from Al-Azhar. Harming Al-Aqsa will spark new wars. And then they cite a quote from this guy, the sheikh, the head of Al-Azhar University in Cairo. Remember him, who was kissing the Pope a few years ago in the United Arab Emirates? And he came out and he said, the dust of Al-Aqsa, Al-Abrahimi, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre can only be purified by the gun of the resistor. Al-Ibrahimi is the cave of Machpelah, where the patriarchs are buried. And then there was this terror attack in El-Ad on Independence Day. 3 people were killed, one of them a father of young children. You see their pictures there. They did catch the people that were doing it. Let's go over that. I will talk about this in the future. This is a pretty important article. This is one of the leaders of the IDF that was interviewed in Israel Hayom, essentially saying Iran is a few weeks away from accumulating a sufficient amount of uranium for a nuclear bomb. And he talked about some of the defense postures of Israel. But then there's this interesting thing with the Abraham Accords. The UK has now formed a group called the UK Abraham's Accord Group. I think this is significant. Building a new Middle East to achieve peace and prosperity. I think I read that somewhere. We believe that a new era in the Middle East is possible. The Abraham Accords signed in 2021 between Israel and the UAE and Bahrain were a game changer. New friends are working together to make a long-troubled region more peaceful and prosperous. This is from Jewish News. The Abraham Accords are like no other peace deal with Israel's neighbors. There was even in this morning's Jerusalem Post, there's an article that says Europe should establish a coordinated body on the Abraham Accords. This is a big deal. So look, there's a dispute about the Abraham Accords. How do we interpret Psalm 83? Is it a prophecy about a future war Bill Salas thinks that. Is it been fulfilled already? There are other people that say that. All I know is, and some say, well, it's just a thing about how to deal with your enemies. So that's the lesson you should take away from it. And so what does it mean? What is it a prophecy? It certainly gives you an indication of certain people groups and their animosity and cunning and conniving towards Israel. I think we can all agree on that. But this portends something more. This is in this morning's, they'll be in the paper tomorrow. Wall Street Journal, Jared Kushner's new fund plans to invest Saudi money in Israel. And he has a thing called the Abraham Accords Peace Institute. And it was released last August. Somebody put out their annual strategy. And raising money from Saudi Arabia to invest in Israel is part of it. He's raised $3 billion. How many of you have raised $3 billion recently? Jared Kushner's new private equity fund plans to invest millions of dollars of Saudi Arabia's money in Israeli startups, according to people familiar with the investment plan, and a sign of warming ties between two historic rivals. Affinity Partners, which has raised more than $3 billion, including $2 billion from the Saudi Kingdom Sovereign Wealth Fund, has already selected the first two Israeli firms to invest in. The decision marks the first known instance that the Saudi Public Investment Fund's cash will be directed to Israel, a sign of the kingdom's increasing willingness to do business with the country, even though they have no diplomatic relations. This could help lay the groundwork for a breakthrough normalization pact between the two countries. Did you read that? By the way, do you know how many people groups are named in Psalm 83? 10. 10 kingdoms? I don't know. I'm just saying, I'm throwing it out there. We'll have to see how it plays out. But I think this is a big deal. And this is what Kushner's been doing since he left. Here's him on the first trip of President Trump 5 years ago, this month. First trip was to Saudi Arabia, then he went to Israel. Unusual that he flew from Saudi Arabia to Israel. That had not happened at that point in time. Here's this thing about Neom. You can see that it's about 50 miles or so across, about 100 miles north to south. This big city that Mohammed bin Salman is building. And with the price of oil way up, I think he might have the money to do that, even though it's desert now. But this is really where things happen. This is sort of the central core of everything, the Temple Mount. There used to be one mosque there and the Al-Aqsa Mosque and a commemorative building. Now there are 4 or 5 mosques that they've put up there in the last years. And then over here at the Eastern Gate, that big room they've turned into a mosque. So there's a big dispute now. Who should control the Temple Mount? Hamas is trying to control it. Jordan and the Palestinian Authority are trying to do it. And Saudi Arabia seems to be waiting in the wings to put their mark on it. And there's some Saudi theologians who've said that it's really not the holiest place in Islam. This week we had a lot of news coming about Jews preparing stones for a coming temple. We had things about people wanting to do a sacrifice on the Temple Mount. We had 1,000 Jews going up on the Temple Mount. And everybody's upset about everything over there. So this is sort of like the epicenter of all of these disputes. And this does have a lot to do with end-time Bible prophecy. I'm going to play a Hebrew clip that happened at the Memorial Day celebration the other night in Israel. Then I'll read the passage. So there in front of everybody, as they remembered soldiers who had fallen defending Israel, a rabbi got up near the end of the ceremony and he read from Psalm 83. And I think this is a big deal. So I'm going to listen. I want you to listen to it in Hebrew. It's about 2 minutes. then I'll read the passage, make a couple other comments, and we'll be on our way. I want you to know, too, though, that our State Department back in April said we're concerned about the violence in Jerusalem on Haram al-Sharif, the Temple Mount. Haram al-Sharif is the Arabic name. I don't like that our government says this, because it seems like every time we do something like this, something bad happens. You know, like, I don't know, a Supreme Court decision gets leaked and there's battles in the streets. Something like that, you know? Or they'll point the Tsarina, Scary Poppins propaganda nanny for the government disinformation or Disinformation Governance Board, whatever. So here's from the ceremony the other night, reading Psalm 83 on Israel's Memorial Day when they celebrate their independence. Look who's standing there listening. Look who's in the front row.
שיר מזמור לאסף, אלוהים אל דומי לך, אל תחרש ואל תשקוט אל. כי לאויביך יהם עיון, ומשנאיך נסו ראש. על עמך יערימו סוד, והתייעצו על צפוניך. אמרו, לכו ונחרידם מגוי, ולא ייזכר שם ישראל עוד. כי נועצו לב יחדיו, עליך ברית יכרותו. העולה אדום ואיש מהילים, מואב והגרים. גבל והמון ועמלק, פלשת עם יושבי צור. גם אשור נלווה עמם, היו זרוע לבני לוט סלע. עשה להם כמדיין, כסיסרא חייבין בנחל קישון. ישמדו והן דור, היו דומן לאדמה. שיטי מו נדיבי מו כהורב וכזאב, וכזבח וכצלמונה, כל נסיכי מו. אשר אמרו ניר שלנו את נהות אלוהים. אלוהי שיטי מו כגלגל, כקש לפני רוח. כהש תבער יהר, וכלהבה תלהט הרים. כן תרדפם בסהריך, ובסופתך תבהלם. מלא פניהם קלון, ויבקשו שמך אדוני. יבושו ויבהלו עדי הד, ויחפרו ויובדו. וידעו כי אתה שמך אדוני לבדך, עליון על כל הארץ.
While I read this, I want you to watch some clips that were played at the memorial service of soldiers and their families, soldiers who had fallen in the defense of Israel. Psalm 83, keep not thou silence, O God. Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee, the tabernacles of Edom, and the Ishmaelites of Moab, and the Hagarenes, Gebal, and Ammon, and Amalek, the Philistines, with the inhabitants of Tyre. Asher also joined with them. They have helped the children of Lot. Do unto them as unto the Midianites, as unto Sisera, as to Jabin at the brook of Kison, which perished at Endor. They became as dung for the earth. Make their nobles like Oreb and like Zeb, yea, all their princes as Zebah and as Zalumah, who said, let us take to ourselves the houses of God in possession. O my God, make them like a wheel, as the stubble before the wind, as the fire burneth a wood, as the flame setteth the mountains on fire. So persecute them with thy tempest, and make them afraid with thy storm. Fill their faces with shame, that they may seek thy name, O Lord. Let them be confounded and troubled forever. Yea, let them be put to shame and perish, that men may know that thou, whose name alone is Jehovah, art the most high over all the earth. I think it's a prophecy. And it's interesting. And you see these images of these wives of these brave men and children who are now without a father, who've been involved, defending in terror attacks and that sort of thing. This is what was played at the memorial service the other night, because they want to remember what happened. And it's interesting that Psalm 83 was the passage that was chosen to be played. In Israel today, Ryan Jones, a Messianic Christian, and by the way, I'm getting a report here recently, but it appears that now, it used to be that every Messianic Christian in Israel knew every other Messianic Christian because there were only a handful. Latest statistics seem to indicate that that number has now risen to 30,000. That's significant. That's something we should praise the Lord for. So I'll just read you this brief article from Ryan Jones, who's a Messianic Christian who lives in Israel. And he said, modern reality continues to echo the Bible as enemies long to destroy them as a nation so that Israel's name is remembered no more. And you'll see that he is a Gentile Christian from the United States, lived there for 26 years now, met his wife, an Israeli-born Christian. And so they live in a Messianic community there. And he said this: you might not know it from all the barbecues that characterize the day, but Americans are pretty serious about Memorial Day and remembering their fallen soldiers. But in the first 20 years of my life growing up in the U.S., I can remember scant few Bible verses being recited on Memorial Day, and never in official capacity. Even after 25 years in Israel, it still struck me anew on Tuesday evening to hear Rabbi Shmuel Rabinovich, Rabbi of the Western Wall, fully recite Psalm 83 during the official state ceremony marking the start of Israel's Memorial Day, as lines of IDF soldiers stood at attention next to him. And it wasn't just a frivolous reading of the scripture. The rabbi used the psalmist's words to plead afresh with the Almighty to come to Israel's aid. For just as in the days when Psalm 83 was penned, Israel's enemies today cunningly conspire against your people. They plot against those you cherish. Come, let us destroy them as a nation so that Israel's name be remembered no more. Rabbi Rabinovich recalled through the words of the Bible that at the time, the Edomites, Ishmaelites, Moabites, Assyrians, and a host of other peoples conspired and aligned with the aim of erasing Israel from the map and from history. They failed. And today, every one of those peoples has disappeared while Israel lives. I disagree with that statement, but now we face the like of the Ayatollahs, Hamas, Hezbollah, BDS, and the United Nations. Israel's small, but our God is great. Like those previous peoples and nations, the powerful foes today arrayed against the Jewish state will fail. The God of Israel will not be challenged, and he will not be mocked. And so I think it's fitting that we stop there. I have some cleanup. I'll try to, if I have time for a midweek update, I'll do that. But I'm just trying to tell you, folks, that from a cultural standpoint, from a geopolitical standpoint, from an Israel, Middle East geopolitical standpoint, we live in very, very significant times. It's time to pay attention, and it's time to share the gospel with those around us. Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for your word. Pray that you will give us opportunities to share the gospel with everyone in increasingly troubled times. But we know, Lord, that you are in charge and in control. And we pray that you give us opportunities to act for your glory in the right way. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.